The storm had started before midnight. By morning, everything was buried. Snow pressed against the cabin windows, heavy and relentless, muffling the world into silence. The tall pines around the small clearing bowed under the weight, their branches drooping like tired arms. No birds sang. No wind moved. Only white and stillness. Inside the cabin, Elias Carter had already been awake for an hour. He hadn't slept much. He never did during storms like this. The sound of wind clawing at the walls brought back memories he never invited. His wife's last breath, the way the world had felt hollow afterward. He stood by the small stove, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Firewood was running low again. Everything was running low these days. Patience, strength, hope. Behind him, 3 quiet shapes huddled under blankets on the old mattress near the fire. Liam, 8 years old, serious for his age, always watching, always thinking. Noah, 5 years old, soft-hearted, sensitive, clutching a worn stuffed bear even in his sleep. And little Grace, just 2, curled into a tight ball, her tiny fingers still clutching a scrap of her mother's old scarf. They were all he had left. Elias buttoned his coat. The metal was ice-cold beneath his fingers. "I'll be right back," he whispered, though they couldn't hear him. He pulled on his boots, grabbed the empty wood basket, and pushed the door open. The wind nearly stole it from his hands. Cold sliced into his face like knives. Snow crunched beneath his feet as he stepped onto the porch. The basket in his hand shifted as he bent to pick up the few small logs stacked along the side of the cabin. Then he saw it. At first he thought it was just another drift of snow, shaped oddly against the railing. But it was too smooth, too deliberate. He stepped closer. His heart slowed. A basket, old and frayed, placed carefully beside his door, half covered in snow, and inside it, movement. Elias dropped his wood immediately and knelt down, his hands trembling so hard he could barely move the thick, soaked blanket. No crying, no sound. Just a tiny, motionless bundle. A baby. Her face was pale, her lips faintly blue. A thin layer of frost clung to the edge of the cloth around her. Her eyelashes were dusted with tiny specks of ice. "Dear God," his voice cracked. He pressed his fingers to her cheek. She was freezing. So cold his breath stuttered in his lungs. Tucked beside her, barely visible, was a small envelope, already damp from melting snow. With shaking hands, he pulled it free and unfolded the paper. "Her name is Ivy. I had no choice. You were the only one I trusted." That was all. No signature. No explanation. Inside the silence of the frozen morning, the weight of another life crushed into his chest. Behind him, the door creaked open. "Daddy?" Liam's voice, thin, confused. Elias turned just in time to see his son standing there in bare feet, eyes wide, staring at the basket. "What is it?" Noah whispered from behind him. "Baby?" Grace murmured, pointing sleepily at the bundle. "She's freezing," Elias said, already lifting the basket with desperate care. "Get inside. All of you. Now." They moved immediately. They always listened when his voice was like that. Inside, the air was warmer but still thin. The fire had nearly died down overnight. Elias dropped the basket beside the hearth and fumbled for kindling. Liam knelt beside him. "Is she dead?" "No," Elias snapped, his heart pounding. "She's not dead." He fed the fire, his hands moving fast, almost frantic. Flames licked up the dry wood. He carefully unwrapped the baby. Her tiny arms were limp. Her chest moved just a little. Slow, frighteningly slow. Grace began to whimper. "Cold baby." "I know," Elias said, pulling blankets from their beds, piling them around the tiny body. "We'll warm her. She'll be okay." But he didn't believe his own words. A heavy knock tore through the cabin. Then another. Elias froze. There were only a handful of people who lived this far out. He opened the door to find a woman standing in the snow, her dark hair pinned back, her thick coat covered in frost. A satchel hung from her shoulder. "Mara?" he breathed. She was their nearest neighbor. The town's former nurse, widowed, quiet, keeping to herself ever since the mining accident took her husband 2 years ago. "I saw you on the porch," she said, already stepping inside, eyes focused. "What happened?" He moved aside and she saw the basket. She knelt immediately, pressing 2 fingers to the baby's neck, her ears close to the tiny chest. Hypothermia, she murmured. But she's alive. Can you save her? Elias asked, fear naked in his eyes. Mara looked up at him. Her expression was steady, unshaking. We can try, but you have to follow exactly what I say. He nodded. There's no time for slow. Bring me warm water, not hot. Blankets, all of them. And dry cloths. Liam ran to the small metal basin. Noah dragged another blanket. Grace hovered near the fire, silent now, watching. Mara worked with calm precision. She removed the baby's frozen clothes, wrapping her in warmed fabric, massaging tiny limbs carefully, encouraging blood to move, urging life back into her. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then 2. The children sat pressed together, their eyes on the tiny body by the flames. And then, a sound. Weak, thin, a cry. So small it almost vanished into the crackling of the fire. But it was real. Grace gasped. Liam's hand flew to his mouth. Noah started to cry. Happy tears. Mara sagged back on her heels. A breath she'd been holding finally released. She's a fighter, she whispered. Elias covered his face with his hands. He hadn't cried in a long time. Not since the day his wife had died. But tears slipped through his fingers now, hot and unstoppable. She needs feeding every 2 hours, Mara said, keeping her warm, clean, monitored. He looked down at the tiny girl whose fingers were now curled around the edge of the blanket. I already have 3 children, he whispered. I can barely. Mara's gaze softened slightly. And yet she's here, on your porch. Of all the doors in this valley, she was left at yours. Her words struck deeper than he wanted them to. I'll stay tonight, she added quietly. Just until she's stable. He nodded. Thank you. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering any sign of who had come, who had gone, who had chosen him for this impossible miracle. Inside the old wooden cabin, by a tired fire, under mismatched blankets, a tiny heartbeat refused to surrender to the cold, and in Elias Carter's chest, something long buried beneath grief shifted, and cracked open again. Morning came slowly, like it was afraid to touch the world. A pale, fragile light crept through the frost-covered window panes, painting the cabin walls in soft gray. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the air inside was still warm, heavy with the faint scent of smoke. Wool and brewed chamomile. Elias had not slept. He sat on the wooden floor beside the cradle he had quickly fashioned from an old basket and extra boards during the night. His back was pressed against the leg of the rocking chair. His eyes never left the baby. Ivy. The name was soft, uncertain in his mind. A name chosen by a woman who had not even stayed long enough to say goodbye. Mara slept in the chair behind him, her head tilted slightly, her arms loosely folded. Even in sleep she looked alert, like someone who had spent a lifetime being ready for emergencies. The baby stirred. A tiny sound escaped her lips, barely louder than a breath. Elias leaned forward immediately, his whole body tense. Mara's eyes opened. She's fine, she murmured. Just dreaming. Babies do that. He let out the breath he'd been holding. How long has it been since you slept? She asked quietly. He didn't answer. You're useless to her if you collapse. I can't close my eyes, he said. I keep thinking, when I open them, she won't be breathing anymore. Mara's gaze softened. She's stronger than she looks. And so are you. He almost laughed at that. Almost. The floor creaked behind them. Liam stood there rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking out in every direction. Noah came next, dragging his stuffed bear by the arm. Grace waddled after them, rubbing sleep from her eyes with tiny fists. Is she okay? Liam asked immediately. Elias nodded. She cried in the night. That's a good sign. Noah smiled for the first time in days. Can I see her? Careful, Mara warned gently, but she smiled too. Liam stepped closer. So did Grace, who reached out, touching Ivy's tiny fingers with a soft reverence. She's so small, Noah whispered. She's here, Liam said quietly. Like us. The words landed heavy in the room. Yes, Elias thought. Like us. Mara stood slowly, stretching stiff muscles. I'll make tea, she said, moving toward the small stove. You all look like you need something warm. The 4 of them sat around the tiny makeshift cradle as if it were something sacred. And in that quiet moment, something strange happened. Elias realized the unbearable, emptiness that had filled this cabin since his wife died, had grown softer, not gone, just quieter. By afternoon, word traveled faster than the storm ever could. A knock came just after noon, then another. Sheriff Dalton stepped inside, snow clinging to his hat and shoulders. "I heard crying last night," he said, his eyes already searching the room. "Didn't sound like any baby that belongs to you." Elias didn't look away from the cradle. "She was left on my porch." Dalton exhaled through his nose slowly and rubbed his jaw. He was a worn man, marked by years of delivering bad news in a harsh, forgotten town. Mara stood beside Elias, silent, steady. "Any idea who left her?" Dalton asked. "No. You see anyone?" "No." Dalton looked down at Ivy, then back at Elias. "Someone didn't just leave a baby on any random doorstep," he muttered. "They picked yours. In this weather. In the middle of a storm. That wasn't coincidence. That doesn't make it my responsibility," Elias snapped, though his words felt empty. Dalton studied his face carefully. "But you already took responsibility." He shifted his eyes to the children gathered around the cradle. "And they already love her." Silence filled the space between them. "I'll make some inquiries in town," Dalton finally said. "But don't get attached. If her mother shows up, the law is clear." He eyed Mara then. "You staying here now?" "For now," she replied, "until the baby's stable." Dalton nodded once and turned for the door. "And Carter?" he added without looking back. "You've already made room for her in that house. It's going to be harder to let her go if she's taken from your heart, too." Then he was gone, his words hanging in the air long after the door closed. Elias stood still. He knew Dalton was right, and that terrified him more than the storm ever could. Days passed. The snow slowly began to melt. Water dripped from the roof in steady rhythms. Mud replaced ice in thick patches along the worn path between the cabins. And Mara didn't leave. She was everywhere. By the hearth, humming softly while she fed Ivy. By the table, teaching Liam how to properly mend a torn sleeve. At the creek, washing clothes with Noah while Grace played at the bank. Her presence infused the cabin with a quiet order it had long forgotten. The children clung to her, especially Grace. "She smells like flowers," she announced one morning, hugging Mara's leg. Mara froze for a moment, then gently stroked her hair. "You're a sweet girl," she said. But in her eyes, Elias saw something else. Longing. Pain buried deep beneath years of silence. Late one evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Elias found her in the old supply room, the one that had once been his wife's sewing space. She didn't realize he was there at first. She stood in the center of the room, staring at nothing, resting her hand over her heart as if it ached. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She startled and quickly stepped back. "I didn't mean to come in here. I was just looking for spare cloth." "You're in my wife's room," he said softly. "I know," she replied. A long silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll avoid it." He surprised himself by saying, "You don't have to." She met his eyes then, really looked at him, not as a nurse, not as a neighbor, but as a man, and him, her. "You don't talk about her," Mara said. "There's nothing left to say that doesn't hurt," he answered. "I know that kind of quiet," she whispered. "When my husband died, everything inside me went silent too." The air between them shifted. Two wounded souls standing in a room full of unspoken memories. "I wasn't supposed to stay this long," Mara said faintly. "I keep telling myself that every morning. But then Ivy looks at me or Grace crawls into my lap and She trailed off. "And I'm scared to admit what it means." He stepped a little closer. "What does it mean, Mara?" Her voice cracked. "It means I'm starting to feel like this is home." The words sat between them, trembling. Before he could respond, Ivy began to cry from the other room. The moment shattered. Mara hurried past him. But something had already changed. Something had already begun. On the seventh day, the storm clouds finally broke. Sunlight poured through the valley like forgiveness. Elias stepped outside, feeling warmth touch his skin for the first time in weeks. He turned and watched through the window as Mara swayed with Ivy in her arms, rocking her gently while humming an old lullaby. Liam sat at her feet carving a small piece of wood. Noah leaned against her leg, reading crooked letters aloud. Grace slept curled up beside her in the fading sunlight. They looked like a family, His heart clenched, and for the first time since his wife's death, he felt something dangerous bloom in his chest. Hope, the kind that could destroy him again, or save him. The first sign that everything was about to fall apart came quietly. It was a knock on the door, soft, hesitant, like whoever stood on the other side already knew they were unwelcome. Mara was rocking Ivy near the fire. The baby had grown stronger over the week, her tiny cheeks now soft and pink, her breath steady and warm against Mara's skin. Elias froze at the sound. He didn't know why, but something inside him already knew. Another knock. Liam looked up. "Dad? I've got it," Elias said, his voice tight as he crossed the room. He opened the door. A young woman stood on the porch. She looked no older than 20. Her face was hollowed by hunger and regret, dark shadows beneath her eyes. Her coat was too thin for the weather and far too large for her frame. But her gaze was fixed on the bundle in Mara's arms. "I'm looking for my baby," she whispered. Elias's hand tightened around the door frame. "What did you say?" Her eyes welled with tears. "Her name is Ivy," she said, "and her name is the only thing I had left to give her." The world tilted. Behind him, Mara went completely still. The rocking stopped. "I'm her mother." A sound like a shattered heart filled the quiet cabin. Grace whimpered. Noah grabbed Liam's sleeve. Mara's jaw tightened, her hands slowly clutching the baby closer to her chest, as if her body knew before her mind ever could that something was being taken away. "How did you find us?" Elias asked hoarsely. "I saw you once in town," the girl said. "Last winter, with your children. You were kind, patient. I knew that if anyone might save her, it was you. She almost died," Mara whispered, almost to herself. The girl flinched. "I know." Tears rolled down her cheeks freely now, desperate, broken, real. "I had no food, no fire, no help. I wrapped her up and I walked 3 miles through the storm, just to leave her with someone who might keep her alive." She fell to her knees on the porch. "I came back every day after that, watched the roof. I saw the smoke in the chimney and I prayed it meant you took her in." Silence swallowed them whole. Mara took a step forward, then another, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "And what now?" she asked. The girl lifted her eyes, raw and pleading. "Now I've found work in town. I have food, a room. I can care for her." Her gaze flicked to Ivy again. "I've come to take my daughter home." The word daughter split the air in two. Grace burst into tears. "No, she's ours. She's our baby," she cried, clinging to Mara's leg. Liam stepped quickly in front of the cradle that barely existed now. "You can't have her. She lives here." The young woman's lips trembled. "I didn't stop loving her just because I was afraid," she said. "I just ran out of ways to keep her alive." Mara's arms trembled as she held Ivy. Every muscle in her body was fighting to keep what her heart had already claimed. "You left her in the snow," she said, voice rising. "Do you understand how close she came to death?" "I know," the girl sobbed. "I know, and I will never forgive myself. But I also knew that staying with me would kill her for sure." Footsteps crunched behind her. Sheriff Dalton stepped up onto the porch, his expression dark and heavy. "I heard there was trouble," he said. He looked at the girl, then at the baby in Mara's arms. "You her mother?" "Yes." "You clean?" he asked bluntly. "Sober? Able to work?" "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Then legally she belongs with you." The entire room shattered at once. "No," Noah whispered. Mara's face drained of all color. Elias stepped toward Dalton, fury and desperation twisting inside him. "You can't just hand her." "I don't make the laws, Carter," Dalton said quietly. "I only follow them." Tears slid silently down Mara's cheeks now. She looked down at Ivy. The small girl had just begun to stir, her tiny hand curling into the fabric of Mara's sleeve, like she was afraid to be alone again. Mara kissed the top of her head. Once, twice. Then, trembling, she slowly stepped toward the girl on the porch. Elias felt his legs turn to stone. The children cried openly begging the world to stop. "I keep her warm every night," Mara breathed. "She sleeps like this. Right here. She likes when I sing to her." The young woman reached out, scared, grateful, devastated all at once. "Thank you for loving her when I couldn't." Mara placed Ivy into her arms. It felt like burying a child. Grace collapsed onto the floor. Liam turned away, unable to watch. Noah covered his ears to block out his own sobs, and Mara stood there, arms empty, looking as if something inside her had died. "I'm sorry," the mother whispered as she clutched her baby to her chest. "I'm not," Mara said. She turned, walked past Elias without another word, without another look. The door slammed behind her as she stepped out into the biting wind. Elias stood in silence as the young woman carefully wrapped Ivy tighter. Then she turned, stepping down from the porch. One last glance. "She lived because of you," she said. Then she disappeared. Not just into the snow, but out of their lives. The cabin that once felt warm now felt like a tomb. Days passed. Mara never came back. Her small cabin down the path remained dark. No smoke, no movement. Elias left bread at her door. It froze where he set it. He knocked. He called her name. Nothing. Inside his own home, it felt as if the soul had been ripped out of the walls. Grace refused to let go of the blanket Ivy had used. Noah stopped speaking. Liam spent long hours staring out the window at the snow, as if he could somehow will her to return. And Elias? He sat beside the empty cradle, his chest ache turning into a familiar, suffocating numbness. "I failed again," he whispered to the universe. "I didn't save her. I didn't save Mara." Night pressed in around the cabin. The fire burned low. And outside, winter returned with a cold vengeance. 3 days passed in silence. No laughter. No humming. No rocking chair creaking beside the fire. The cabin felt like a shell that had carried life once, then lost it again. Elias barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of snow filling his lungs, of a basket sitting empty in the cold, of tiny fingers slipping away from his grasp. Grace had stopped asking for Ivy. That somehow hurt more than her cries. Liam spoke only when necessary. Noah stared at walls that no longer held warmth, and Mara's window stayed dark. On the 4th night, a strange calm settled into the land. The wind died. Snow stopped falling. The world seemed to hold its breath. That was when Emma's voice echoed again in his mind, like a ghost from a life that wasn't his anymore. "Be brave, Daddy. Go get her." Elias hadn't believed in courage for a long time. He had only believed in survival. But somewhere deep inside, something stirred. "If I let her disappear the way I let my wife disappear, then I deserve this loneliness." He stood slowly, pulled on his coat, stepped outside into the cold night. The path between their cabins looked different now. Familiar, sacred, broken. He climbed the small steps, raised his hand, knocked. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, movement. A soft shuffle. The door opened just an inch. Mara stood there, her face pale, her eyes red and hollow with grief, her hair loose like she no longer cared to fix it. "I told you to go away," she said. "No," he replied quietly. "You told yourself you didn't deserve to stay." She tried to close the door. He stopped it with his hand. "I'm not letting you disappear. You don't get to decide what I do with my pain," she snapped. "I'm not here to decide anything for you," he said. "I'm here because I love you." The words hung between them, trembling. She looked away. "You don't even know what love is anymore." "I know exactly what it is," he said. "It's the reason I'm standing here instead of hiding in my sorrow like I always do." Her hands shook at her sides. "I can't take losing children again, Elias. She wasn't ours to lose," he said softly. "But you are mine to choose." Her eyes lifted to his, sharp, afraid, hopeful. "You don't really mean that?" "I do. I've meant it for longer than I realized." He stepped closer. "My wife is gone. She always will be. And that grief doesn't magically disappear because I care about you. But something else grew in its place. Something I never thought I'd have again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I am in love with you, Mara. And denying it doesn't make it go away." Silence thickened. "What if I break again?" she whispered. "Then we break together, and then we fix ourselves. Together." Her breath shuddered as she looked past him, toward the faint light from his cabin window, where 3 small shadows waited. "They need me." "Yes," he said, "and I need you too." He reached out his hand, not demanding, just offering. After a long, trembling second, she took it. The door behind her closed softly as she stepped into the night and into his arms. He didn't say another word. Neither did she. They just held each other, two broken hearts choosing not to walk away. Say, spring came for real this time. Grass pushed through melting snow. The world breathed again, slowly, carefully. Mara returned to the house. Not as a visitor this time, not as help, but as part of it. Liam smiled again. Noah began to sing. Grace slept tangled in Mara's skirts. And Elias? He finally slept peacefully. One quiet evening, as they planted new seeds in the soft earth behind the cabin, Mara paused, pressed a hand to her stomach. "You're tired?" he asked. "No," she whispered, eyes shining. "I'm different." A long pause followed. In that silence, he already knew. "You don't mean—" His voice was barely a breath. "I didn't think it was possible," she said. "They told me after the accident that I would never carry a child." She looked up at him, tears of wonder in her eyes. "But I went to town. I asked. I knew something wasn't the same." He stood frozen. "I'm pregnant, Elias." For a moment, time ceased to exist. Then he pulled her into him so hard she laughed through her tears. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she nodded. "A Christmas baby. A miracle born from another miracle. A life from near death. Hope reborn in a new form." Grace clapped her hands even though she didn't fully understand. Noah ran circles around them. Liam smiled like the 8-year-old he was meant to be. And in that moment, Elias saw the truth. The baby in the basket had saved them, not by staying, but by bringing them back to life. Say, winter returned again. But this time the fire never went out. Snow fell gently on Christmas Eve, the same as it had last year. Inside the cabin, Mara lay in bed, gripping Elias's hand as new life fought its way into the world. The midwife whispered, smiling, "Strong heartbeat, strong lungs." A cry filled the air. Powerful, alive, unstoppable. A boy. Tears streamed down Elias's face. He watched the tiny chest rise and fall. Watched Mara cradle him with love so fierce it made his heart ache. "What will we call him?" she whispered. He smiled. "Hope?" She laughed through tears. "No," she said softly. "That name already belongs to a little girl out there in the world somewhere." She looked down at the baby. "This one is proof that hope never left us." She kissed the child's forehead. "Let's call him—" Noah's middle name, Samuel. Elias nodded. Samuel Carter. Born from snow, pain, courage, and love. Later that night, when the children lay sleeping and the world settled into peace, Elias stood on the porch again. Snow covered everything. Another basket could have been sitting there, but this time it was empty, because the miracle he once found in the cold now slept warm in his arms. Mara stepped beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think hope was just a name." He kissed her temple. "But now I know she was a message." Inside, their family slept. Together, safe, whole, and for the first time in years, Elias Carter believed the world had not abandoned him. It had been preparing him.